A lot of women have hope that the violence will stop, that the perpetrator will change his behaviours. Often they got into this relationship and there was love and respect, and over time different tactics were used by the perpetrator: control, degrading comments, and it can escalate all the way, as we know, to physical violence. So they hope that they can have that relationship back that they once had. For many women, they have invested a lot of time into this relationship, sometimes years, children, and it's really hard for them.
There's a common belief that if women leave violence, then they will be safe. And if they have children, they will also be. Sadly, this is not usually the case. For many women, they will continue to experience violence, either directly or indirectly, in the form of continuation of threats, destruction of property, stalking, for some time following separation. Threats to take the children away from the mother will often escalate, become more pronounced following separation.
And it's very confronting for a victim of any crime to, talk to someone they've never met before and just expose something where there's a lot of probably unwarranted feelings of that their failure in a relationship, they haven't lived up to their friends' and family's expectations. Why is this happening to them? They were never meant to be a victim, because it's important to realise that no one chooses to be the victim. The offender chooses to be the offender.
Sometimes the women are isolated from their family and friends due to tactics by the perpetrator. Over time, the perpetrator has removed the woman from her family and friends, so they're not around as support, so the women don't feel like they could go to these people now.
Women may fear being judged by their family for having stayed in the relationship for as long as they did, particularly if these family members have difficulty understanding the reasons, the difficulties in leaving. Many of these women will also experience shame for being in the violence, and these anxieties can act as real barriers to them asking for assistance and them leaving.
Women are most at risk after ending a relationship. The violence does not stop. Harassment, stalking, the family law court, all of that comes into play after a woman leaves a relationship. Women say that when they're in the relationship, they predict what's going to happen. They know, they've got their safety plan, they know what they're going to do and when to expect violence, whereas once they leave, they don't know.
Yeah, we would like to think that once a woman victim of domestic violence left the partner and left that situation, that they could move on with their life and be safe. But unfortunately, the behaviours of some men, just won't allow that. They have such a controlling sort of attitude and sort of mindset that, no matter what the victim of the previous relationship does to sort of establish a new life, moving to a new town, for example, getting even changing their name, moving the kids from school to a different school, they just do everything they can to stalk them and to hunt them down to find where they are.
When a woman decides to leave, the perpetrator is losing control. And when a perpetrator loses control, that's the most vulnerable for the family or the victims. A lot of the times the perpetrator, he'll say he's going to kill himself, kill her, or the victim, and the children. And a lot of the time women that live in a controlled situation find it very difficult to make a decision that they feel is a good decision. And living with that violence over the top of their head, the threat that this may happen, is one of the reasons that women stay.
So some women we see are concerned about the risks of harm to their own children. There might have been threats to harm their children. There might also be threats to harm themselves and the children if they leave that relationship. For some women there has been expressed concern that the child actually belongs to the paternal side of the family. So after they would leave, the concern is that the father will actually try and take the child back overseas and the child will belong to his family. Some women are very concerned that if they leave, they may never see their children again.
The way that the victim ensures the safety of the children is complying with the demands of the perpetrator, and that might mean going back with the perpetrator. And I've even met domestic violence victims and that where they've tried to get away from all these threats, where they've been stalked down by the offenders, and then they've just conceded it's easier to be with the person because at least they know where that person is.
Women have to make a very balanced decision about what they think is the safest thing for them and for their children. I think it's a very difficult scenario when we're talking about small children in that relationship, because the woman has to make decisions that provides for the best outcome for her and her child, and sometimes it's the sense of not knowing what they're going to.
The perpetrators will often use the children against the women. Older children especially, they might say, the woman is trying to break up the family unit, it's their fault, which a lot of the women then start to believe.
In our society, mothers are usually held to a different standard than our fathers, with mothers being held more accountable than fathers for their children's well-being. Even though it is the violence by the father that is threatening the well-being of the children, women tend to feel responsible for this.
So women are often threatened by their partners that if they leave, they will never see the children again, that he will look at custody issues in an attempt to make sure she has no access to her children. Women are very scared by this, and this will often cause them to stay in that relationship.
Sometimes you hear people saying, but he's a good father. You may even have women in domestic violence saying this. In fact, this is a reason often cited by women and some in the community for staying. However, a good father doesn't hurt his children's mother.
The emotional and psychological impacts of the violence mean that these women often feel hopeless, they feel absolutely exhausted. They start to take on the belief of the things the perpetrator's been telling them, that no one will believe them, that they're crazy, that they're to blame. They completely change who they are as a person. They're often, women will say that they would prefer a physical punch because that heals, but the emotional and psychological impacts stay with them.
Another reason is too that women that are going through either physical or psychological abuse often suffer from depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the perpetrator knows this and can say, well, you're crazy. No one's going to believe you. And if it goes through, you're probably going to lose the children because they'll come in and take them off you because you're not a good mother.
There's many impacts that we're aware of. I guess what we often see in our organisation is women come into hospital feeling depressed, anxious, present as lonely and scared. They're also often isolated by their local community and isolated because of the nature of the relationship and the violence within the relationship. Their partner has limited their contact with their local supports. So we see that actually discourages women from seeking help from the resources that they would normally seek help from. They present as often having symptoms similar to that of depression and feeling helpless and worthless and unable to actually make the changes that they need to or that they might think that they need to do at that time.
For an Aboriginal woman to leave community means to leave the whole of community, to go and find safety in mainstream society. And sometimes that's not a safe place for an Aboriginal woman as well, because of all the racism that still occurs out there in society today. So an Aboriginal woman would sometimes feel it's safer to stay in community, experiencing the violence, than to have to leave community. What we know with Aboriginal communities is that it takes a whole community to rear a child. Aboriginal people are very holistic. It's not just the individual parent, it's the sisters, the aunties, the uncles. It's a whole of community that parent children. So when a woman has to leave domestic violence and take her children out of community, there's far more loss. There's a loss of whole of family. There's a loss of all those rearing supports that happens around their children. The children lose family members. So there's a lot more loss when having to take the children out of community.
Genuine fear with women why they don't come to police or don't take any further action is a number of reasons. A lot of women are ashamed of what's going on. And they believe if they come to the police or they go and speak to someone, it could escalate the problem at home. And if they escalate the problem, they could put themselves and their children in further danger.
The woman's also got to realise, they're exposing what the offender did, who's often, particularly in close, intimate, relationships, and when they're married and long-term, residing in the same address, that they're exposing, in a lot of instances, a criminal offence that their partner, the person they've chosen to, share their life with, has committed against them. So it is very confronting.
When police attend a situation or women are involved with police, a lot of the times we have to take legal action. A lot of women feel that this is a very difficult time in their life. One, they're embarrassed. Two, they're frightened of the court system. They have to face the perpetrator in court, which then can lead to maybe an escalation in the violence. They also then believe that if the perpetrator was to win in court, this could endanger them even more.
And there's also really huge fears from the women of their men with deaths in custody. A lot of times they're more concerned about the responses from police with their men than they are about their own well-being.
Young people living with an intellectual disability can find themselves exposed to a range of verbal abuse tactics. Things like criticisms or put-downs, saying things like, "You're stupid," or "You're slow," or "No one will believe you." These sorts of comments, particularly over time, and particularly if they extend upon previous experiences where they've been bullied in the past, can really influence a young person to start believing them. They start thinking, I am slow, I am stupid. They start thinking that no one will believe them. And these sorts of things contribute to them staying in that relationship, not seeing any way to leave, thinking this is how things should be.
A lot of different cultures, for one, fear police. In their own countries, police aren't always the helpful and violence is perceived as being ordinary and normal.
Some of the women are on spousal visas, so there's a fear of being deported back to their country. They're not entitled to any benefits that might support them moving, like Centrelink or Department of Housing. Sometimes within their culture, it's leaving or a violent relationship or separation or divorce can be frowned upon, and there's often a degree of secrecy within the home.
A commonly held view in the community is that younger women should find it easier to leave an abusive relationship because they don't have any children or because their relationships tend to be shorter. So they feel real love, a real desire for connection with that person. It's often this that makes it very hard to leave that person, just as it would for an older woman. Young people are starting to work out their relationships, working out what to expect, what's normal, what will they put up with, trying to work out what's acceptable in relationships. Younger people, as they try to put themselves out in these relationships and try these things for the first time, often leave themselves vulnerable to the tactics of coercion or the tactics of control of a perpetrator. This can mean they might not notice some of these tactics, which could be things like checking up on their Facebook account, checking their emails, or checking where are you on phone messages or phone calls. Those things might initially come across as being quite concerned or an expression of these genuine feelings of love or affection for this person. but they can actually later in time be shown to be forms of control and coercion.
Often you can call the domestic violence line and there is no accommodation for women to stay in a refuge. Women can often go from temporary accommodation night by night, and if they've got children, that's really difficult to be going from a different home every single night, carting their children and their belongings around. Financial factors play a really big part in women's decision to leave an abusive relationship. A lot of the time, the perpetrator controls all the money within the household. The bills are in their name, the children's payments go to them. So a lot of the time, the women don't have control over any money. Women struggle to, if they leave, how they can afford rent, how they can afford to provide food for their children. A lot of the times, women really don't have a lot of income coming in. Even if they do, to be a sole parent, to start up in a new home, new furniture, plays a really big role in women being able to financially afford to leave the violence.
Younger people who are in an abusive relationship might find it harder to leave that relationship, particularly if they're living with their partner. They have less access to finances. It might mean they have less savings, they have less work experience, and are less able to enter the workforce to be able to earn that income. Therefore, they can find it harder to enter accommodation.
They also often think about the loss of their livelihood, the financial security that being in that relationship provides, the loss of stable accommodation and stable household for their child.
Once we appreciate the many barriers to leaving that a woman faces, we are better able to understand that if she does decide to leave, she will be facing a difficult, distressing and dangerous journey. It should be of no surprise then that on average it takes a woman 5 to 7 attempts to leave before she does so permanently. Leaving is a process, not an event.